You're listening to a Reykjavik Grapevine podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the almost completed true history of Iceland, Season 2, the last Viking mystery, Episode 2. In these podcast series we've been mostly talking about the Norse discovery of Greenland, but today we're going to find out about the guy whose statue is right here behind me, Leifur Eriksson, the man who discovered North America allegedly and called it Vinland. We're going to try to find out who he was, what he was all about, and then Vinland, where that place was, what it was all about, and who traveled there. Welcome, we're your hosts Jón and
Valur. Did you know that Valur means battlefield in Old Norse?
I feel like we've talked about this before.
We can never talk about it enough. It's like Valhalla and Valkyrie.
Let's talk about it some more then.
Well, let's talk about your name, Jón.
Well, you have these all sort of cool pagan versions of your name, and my name is Jón, which is basically John, or like John the Baptist or something, a Christian name.
It comes from the Bible.
Lacks all of the gore and the Vikingness of it. Very sort of plain vanilla. Plain vanilla.
Pretty vanilla. But
Pretty vanilla.
today we're going to talk about actually the man who may have brought Christianity to Greenland. We're standing outside the largest church in Iceland.
Indeed we are.
And with Leif the Lucky in the background. Leifur Eriksson. He is one of the most famous Vikings of them all.
Yeah, Leif the Lucky. True.
I always thought that lucky was because he found America, but I don't know if that qualifies as luck. But actually it is because on his way back he rescued a crew, or a shipwrecked crew, including the lovely Gudrid.
Right, whom we will talk about.
Yeah, who then married his brother, so lucky for him.
Yeah, or his brother.
Yeah, but the idea of luck actually is that luck is sort of a being. It's an external being, like a familiar, and it follows you around, or it doesn't, and then like you're out of luck. You lost your luck. Okay,
so it's kind of like a, I don't know, does this have a name in English where you have like a protective spirit following around, which is something that is not sort of uncommon to Icelandic folklore? Yeah, they're called familiars in the folklore. They are called familiars, all right.
But it's guardian angel of sorts, except guardian angels are really not supposed to leave when they get tired of you, but the familiars don't have to.
No, that's kind of, if they leave you and leave you to your fate, if they grow tired of you, that's kind of.
Yeah.
I would have to talk to Heaven's HR about that.
You can try in the big church. Ask if they have a desk.
Well, to recap, Leifur is the son of Eiríkur, whom we talked about in the last episode.
Yeah.
Eiríkur, the Viking who found Greenland.
And Leifur grew up in Greenland. He may have been born in Iceland, but he certainly grew up in Greenland.
But based on sort of the chronology here, you know, the Saga say, or the scholars say that Eiríkur found Greenland in about 985.
Yeah.
So, and America is being discovered at around the year 1000.
Yeah.
So based on that, Leifur would probably have been born in Iceland, one would suspect. Otherwise he would have been like a 15-year-old sailing on his own. Maybe not impossible,
but
unlikely.
Yeah. The oldest archaeological artifacts that we found in North America are from about 1030. Christianity comes to Iceland and maybe Greenland in the year 1000, but 1000 is a nice round number, so it's sort of tempting to just put everything on the year 1000 that you can.
That's true. But about his luck again, I mean, is it not like one sometimes suspects Christian propaganda at play when you read these sagas about Leifur and his father? Yeah,
but the familiar is sort of a pagan being.
Yeah, which is kind of like my question was going to be, they're not sticking it on him, that name Lucky, because he brought Christianity to Greenland. It's not actually because of that. It's actually because of sort of pagan.
Yeah, there are pagan elements, and they're pagan elephants. No elephants, but there are pagan elements in the sagas of Erik the Red and the Saga of the Greenlanders.
Yeah.
And they talk to ghosts, for example, or when people die, they come back to as ghosts and have a chat. But it is possible that Leifur sort of because it was a well-known name that he got things stuck on him. He may have brought Christianity to Greenland and then they decided he found America, or vice versa, or maybe he did both. But he's kind of a boring character in the sagas.
Yeah, like there's not much depth to him. He just is, and then he's not really that much spoken about. You know, like you love this TV show Vikings, right?
Yeah. So they just cancelled Vikings Valhalla.
That's too bad for you.
Yeah, it's too bad for the world.
But in that, I mean, he's portrayed very differently.
Yeah, there he is sort of a killing machine with an axe in each hand, and he goes all the way to Constantinople and to Sicily and to Greece, none of which he did.
No.
Farthest he went away was Norway, and then of course North America. But yeah, they do try to make it more interesting. And also in the Japanese manga, the Vinland Sagas, they make Leifur into sort of an old braggart. He never really does anything, but he's just always full of himself and talking about his exploits.
Seems a lot more accurate.
Yeah, where in that story, Thorfinn and Gudrid is the main character.
Yeah.
Which he actually also is in the Vinland Sagas that we have, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah. Right.
So we're here by the statue.
And the church.
And the
which
church.
you can hear.
Making its presence felt.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've been to Minnesota, but there are a lot of statues of Leifur there, but he usually has a beard there.
Yeah.
Which he probably did. And horns on his helmet, which he definitely did not.
No, there's a lot of horned Vikings in North America as statues. I think one I remember is in Gimli in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
Which has horns, and I often wonder about where that came from. But I guess it is courtesy of sort of like Victorian Saga revival, where they were really interested in the sagas in the late 19th century, especially in England.
Yeah, they like to paint horns on their helmet, which may have been worn ceremonially, but certainly not in battle or practically.
No, and it really stuck in the imagination of everybody.
And Wagner, in his 4-hour operas, he put horns on everyone's helmet to make it more interesting to look at.
I think I have to go talk to the dog. Just a second. Hey. Þú voru að kjöra hérna? So Valur, since we are by the statue, we should maybe talk a little bit more about it. It's a nice statue.
It is. It's a gift from the United States to Iceland in the year 1930, which is the 1000-year anniversary of Parliament.
True.
And thankfully he doesn't have horns on his helmet, so they got that right. He does have a cross in one hand, emphasizing his Christianness. He's also very clean-shaven, which may have represent the fashions of 1930 more than 1030.
Yeah, one would think that shaving wasn't really that popular back in the 1010s or something.
Probably not. In fact, in Njál's Saga, one guy, the protagonist, doesn't grow a beard, and this makes people mock him, and some killings ensue. So, unless it is to emphasize Leifur's Christianness, that, maybe that was sort of the punk rock of the Viking age. He said, no, I don't want to go out to kill and plunder, I just want to stay home and pray.
So the Christian hipster of the 1010s or 1020s would have been clean shaven,
and like the rest of the
and
people.
The helmet would be hornless, obviously.
Yeah.
And I guess a cross would be appropriate.
But wait, I think I can feel my inner Viking coming out. My beard is growing, my hair is growing, and my clothes are turning to sheepskin.
Oh my god. So tell me again, Valur, there are two conflicting accounts of who actually spotted America first, whether it was Bjarni Herjólfsson or Leifur. But since the Bjarni Herjólfsson account is a little richer, maybe we should go through it in a little more detail. He set sail from Iceland to try to head to Greenland. He gets lost at sea in a fog or something, and finally gets his bearing, decides to continue west, and stumbles upon land which does not match the description of Greenland at all.
Yeah,
He comes to a wooded shoreline with like white sands.
Yeah, there's 3 lands that he discovers, and he names them. The first one, Helluland, which means, I don't know, plateland or something with no growth. There's Markland, which does indicate growth, and finally Vinland. And then he goes to Greenland and there people make fun of him for not stepping ashore. They make fun of him for being not curious, which is an un-Viking thing to do. So according to this account, Leifur buys his ship, sets off, finds the aforementioned places, and then sets up camp in Vinland, which he of course calls Leif's Búðir or Leifur's camp, because that's how they would name things.
Yes.
Usually after themselves. And he only stays there for a little while. He comes back with a load of goods, but he never goes again. And it's up to others to go find Leif's Búðir. But there is Vinland, there's a question of is it Vinland or Vinland? Vinland would mean wine land.
Yeah.
And in the Saga of Erik the Red, they try to explain this by having one of his men, Turk from Germany, eat grapes, get drunk, and he says, "Oh, I know this from home," but none of this kind of makes sense because you don't really get drunk from eating grapes. You may actually have stumbled upon magic mushrooms or something. But this is used to explain Vinland, the wine land, but perhaps it was Vinland, which means
an oasis or a
grapevine land.
Grapevine land. Oh,
like
the
that.
land of grapevines.
Yes.
Well, I'm okay with that.
Yes. Let's go with that.
So we're actually named after the original name of North America. That's our magazine.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe the other way around, but the chronology doesn't really add up.
No, okay. But I mean, they claim to find grapes of wine. But I mean, it could have also just been numerous other types of berries that are native to the continent of North America, I guess.
Yeah, it could have been.
Or the magic mushrooms, which I kind of like as an idea.
Yeah, or magic something.
Entirely possible. Magic something.
One thing he does not find, however, are people.
No, he sees no people. That's absolutely true. But I mean, in the vein of his old man, he does kind of upsell this place, although it's an easier sell than Greenland was.
Yeah. Although, funnily enough, the marketing works for Greenland. People do sell there. People try to settle in Vinland. The next person to go out, in one account he's actually with Leifur, but in the more detailed account, he goes off on his own with his own men. And this is Thorvaldur, who's Leifur's brother, or at least half-brother, through Erik the Red. And he finds people. So imagine human beings come to being in Africa. Probably they go into two different roads. One leads through Asia and over the Bering Strait to America, the other one to Europe, and finally to Iceland. And then thousands and thousands of years later, these two strains of humanity meet again. And what do you think happens?
Well, I mean, violence. Unfortunately, humans are always being humans.
Yeah, and Vikings are being Vikings. And so Thorvaldur is the first account of contact. He sees groups of three, so 3 times 3 people sleeping underneath their canoes, and he proceeds to kill all of them. And the saga doesn't give any explanation for this. It just seems like the normal thing to do.
But one of them escapes.
One of them escapes. So they murder 8, and then one of them escapes. And then they sort of get their just desserts because the escapee gathers up his friends and his tribe. And then we have probably the first documented longship versus canoe battle in history. And
perhaps the only.
Perhaps the only recorded one. So they fire back and forth. The natives are driven off, but in a true Hollywood manner, after the battle, Thorvaldur reaches under his shirt and sees that it's bloody and finds that he's got an arrow underneath his armpit. And he says, "Oh, I'm going to be dying here," because, of course, ironically, he says, this would be a nice place to stay. And now he will wind up staying there forever.
True.
So he's probably the first European to be buried in North America in a place called Krossanes, which means cross hill.
Right. So we wait for this to pass. The church bells are ringing.
It's ringing noon. It's ringing 12. Yeah. So, when the statue was first built here, there was no church. But 10 years later, in 1940, it was full of Americans. There was an American camp here in World War II.
So they had the church next. They had the
Camp next to the statue.
right.
And the church started building it in 1946, and it took just 40 years.
Yeah, I remember it still being in its final stages in part of my earliest Reykjavik memories.
Yeah, I lived on the next street, and I remember stealing wood to build a wood house in the garden.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's why my life has been cursed, because I stole from God.
But we're in the next. Now we're going to try to find out more about Vinland and where exactly it was.
Yes.
And
where was it?
In order to do so, we're going to try to get some help.
We are going to speak to an expert.
And that's off to that.
So we are here with Sverrir Jakobsson, professor at the University of Iceland, who is one of Iceland's and maybe the world's leading authorities on all things Viking. And he actually supervised my paper on the Eastern Vikings, but now we're going to talk about the voyages west. Mm-hmm. So, Sverrir, in the early 20th century, many, for example, the polar explorer Fridtjof Nansen surmised that Vinland was actually made up a literary construct, and it even reminded of happy islands such as Atlantis or others where everything was sort of perfect. But then in the 1960s, they actually found archaeological evidence of the Vikings going west.
Mm. Well, it's true, but Vinland is mentioned quite early in the literature. So we have a description from the late 11th century, the 8th decade, around 1075, by Adam of Bremen, who actually mentions Vinland there, which is very strong indication that this discovery was known in the Nordic lands. Because he would not have gotten this information from anywhere else. And taken together with the evidence of Íslendingabók, you can say that in the last decades of the 11th century and the first decades of the 12th century, Icelanders at least and Scandinavians knew about this island of Vinland. Of course, we have to take this together with the archaeological evidence from Newfoundland and the habitation there, which has been dated to around 1021, and then we can say that the Norsemen settled in Vinland with a very typical Norse longhouse in the early 1020s, and these voyages were known later in the same century and in the early 12th century. Then we have a bit of a hiatus until the Vinland Sagas were composed, which is in the late 13th centuries.
So how can we say anything about how reliable they are?
They are not very reliable. We don't know if they are based on written evidence or just on some folklore or oral tradition. But the Vinland Sagas, we can say, is an attempt to connect the Vinland journeys to certain families. And firstly, the so-called discoverer of Vinland, Leifur Eriksson, who was one of the Icelanders who emigrated to Greenland, and then traveling to Greenland he actually founded new lands. And the Vinland Sagas connect the discovery of Vinland to this person, Leifur Eriksson, who was also credited with the Christianization of Greenland.
But is he likely to have done both things, Christianized Greenland?
Well, there is... oral tradition has a tendency to connect monumental events with the same people. So we can say that if the narrative of the Vinland Sagas, which is collaborated by, for example, sagas of the Old Norse kings a bit, from the same period, you can say that there was a tradition that connected Leifur Eriksson both with the Christianization of Greenland and then with the discovery of Vinland.
But why is he not a saint? Because most people who Christianize countries become saints.
Well, he is a secular figure,
Mm-hmm.
so that is maybe the reason. Or also, not all people who were trying to elevate to sainthood actually became saints.
Mm-hmm.
But we could say that the Vinland sagas are a part of an attempt to elevate the status of Leifur Eriksson as an important missionary.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are, of course, in the two Vinland sagas, which are called Erik Saga and Greenlanders Saga, an attempt is made to raise the profile of other Norse explorers to Vinland.
Yeah, they're not as well known. Like there's not Thorfinn and Gudrid are very important people in the sagas, but they're not as well known as Leifur Eriksson, and that there are no statues everywhere.
No, because people need a single person to elevate.
Yeah.
But in the Vinland sagas, there's clearly an attempt made to elevate the status of Thorfinn and his wife, Gudridur Thorbjarnardóttir, and their fate has been a bit. In the early 20th century, an attempt was made to elevate Thorfinn Karlsefni,
Mm-hmm.
but in the late 20th century and this century, it has been Guðríður Thorbjarnardóttir as a sort of female explorer who has been elevated. But these are probably based on oral accounts by their descendants in Skagafjörður,
Mm-hmm.
where they're reported to have resided, and one of the earliest bishops of Iceland, Thorlákur Runolfsson,
Mm-hmm.
was a descendant of them. So you could say that the narratives emphasizing the Vinland journeys might be traced to Thorlákur Runolfsson and his descendants in a bit.
So some of the early bishops, I think 3 of them are descended from these people, and
Yeah.
they may have tried to make as much of their ancestors as possible by having them.
And of course there was some oral tradition about Vinland exploration.
Mm-hmm.
But we must be aware that in the sagas they are composed at the earliest in the late 13th century,
Mm-hmm.
and they are literary construct. So there's a lot of typological features. For example, where was Vinland located? This was not certain to people at this time. So what we can be sure is from the narratives that Vinland was south of Iceland,
Mm-hmm.
because that is actually depicted quite explicitly in the narratives.
Mm-hmm.
However, were they traveling directly to the west, as is often shown on modern maps,
Mm-hmm.
this cannot be derived from the sagas. So that is something that we can add to the maps, knowing that North America is west of Iceland and Greenland. So that is not clear from the evidence. And actually, medieval Icelanders would have been in some trouble trying to locate Vinland. So in some geographical accounts, Vinland is actually situated in the south and close to Africa. And also because in the Vinland narratives, Vinland is populated by inhabitants that the Norsemen called Skrælings.
Mm-hmm.
And who were these people? Probably in the mind of the people writing the sagas, they were kind of Africans or related to Africans.
Do we know anything about the word Skrælings? It does, to the modern Icelandic ear, it does sound a little bit like peeled people, because they were Redskins. It doesn't sound a very nice term, but
it's probably associated with skin.
yeah.
And in the Vinland descriptions, a lot of emphasis is made on the canoes that they had, which are like boats of skin.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. But also you have to keep in mind that when the Vinland episodes are written, for example, the late Greenlanders Saga, which is located in Flateyjarbók from the late 14th century, Icelanders had actually met Inuits who had moved to Greenland at this time, because we know from descriptions from the 14th century that Inuits had started moving to Greenland, and that might have influenced the description of the people in, for example, Greenlanders Saga.
But the canoe does seem to be historically accurate for the Native Americans in maybe the year 1000.
Yeah, there is some genuine information there interspersed with sort of literary topoi.
It's been a popular parlor game even deadly serious puzzle game to locate the actual Vinland based on the descriptions. The only archaeological site that we've found so far is in Newfoundland, but according to the Sagas, it would seem to be farther south. Can we say anything about where the actual Vinland was?
This is a description of vines, because Vinland is named after vines, and they are not actually to be found as northerly as Newfoundland. So there would have to be vines, more southerly located vines somewhere, for this to make sense. But we don't know if the Norsemen traveling to Vinland in the 1020s are actually the same people that are referred to in the Vinland Sagas, because according to the chronology of the Vinland Sagas, these journeys would happen around 20 years earlier. So there is not an exact match between the archaeological finds and the later narrative descriptions, which is important to keep in mind. But it has also been surmised that Norsemen continued traveling to Vinland even later than the 1020s.
The oldest account in Iceland is from 1347, when they seem to be going there for wood.
There is also this description of new land in the 1280s, where Icelandic travelers are described in the annals as discovering a previously unknown island. Where was this new land situated? We don't know. So that could be Newfoundland or any other island in North America, for that matter.
So what we can say for sure is that the Vikings were sailing to North America for
centuries. We know that they did, and they might have continued sailing there even longer than the 1020s, even if we haven't managed to discover any inhabitations that are from a later date.
Okay, well, Sverre Jakobsson, thank you very much.
So we're standing here next to another statue. This one is of Thorfinnur Karlsefni. It's a statue by Einar Jónsson, and I guess it's from a similar time.
It's from 1924.
Yeah. And I've actually seen, there are two of these. There's an identical statue in Philadelphia that I actually visited at some point 10 years ago.
Yeah.
With some of the Grapevine crew, actually. I think I heard somewhere that statue had actually been torn down and thrown into the river next to it, but I'm not entirely sure if that's true, but whatever.
Yeah. Not everybody likes Vikings.
But as we've kind of found out now, is that when it comes to finding America, even though Leifur Eriksson gets credited for it, this is actually the main guy. So tell me a little more about that one.
So Thorfinnur Karlsefni, his nickname Karlsefni can mean the handsome, as you can tell. And he was married to a woman called Gudrid, who couldn't help but notice. She had previously been married to Leifur's brother, but he died of plague. And then Thorfinnur from Iceland comes along to Greenland, and they get married, and their honeymoon seems to be to go settle in America, and they make the first concerted attempt to settle there. And they do stay there for at least a couple of years. They do meet the natives. Quite sensibly, they start trading with them. The natives get milk, but Thorfinnur says that they are not allowed to trade their weapons. The Vikings have iron weapons, which the natives don't have. But the accounts differ a little bit, but one story says that one of the natives actually does take an axe, and he checks how it works by hitting someone else in the head. And anyway, when they take the axe, this frightens the Vikings, and a fight breaks out. And the natives are fought back. They are scared of the bull that the Vikings have, which is a novelty to them. And they build a palisade, but after a while they decide that they cannot fight the natives forever, and so they just decide to go away.
Who would have thought that the Vikings would actually have a no weapon sale policy?
Yeah.
Benign of them.
Yeah.
And surprising. Well, maybe not.
Well, probably they didn't want the weapons to be
obviously
used on themselves.
Yeah. So basically, they actually, like, Leifur went there, as we've recounted once and hardly stayed, never met the natives,
Yeah.
and just went back, never went to Vinland again.
No.
But whereas like this is actually like a real attempt to
Yeah.
settling.
Leifur built a camp called Leif's Búðir, which they then settle in.
Yeah.
He doesn't really want to give it to them, but they borrow it. They do stay there for a couple of years. They do also produce the first, you can say, Viking baby born in North America, Snorri.
Yeah.
And I think there's an exchange program named after it to North America. And then, they go back. They go to northern Iceland.
Yeah, Glimbær in Saga.
Yeah, exactly. Where they build a farm there. There's a 19th century farm there. There's a statue of Gudrid there, who has become something of a hero lately, because not only did she go to North America, but she also went to Rome after Thorfinn had died. She walked there as a nun, and their descendants became bishops. So
Yeah, I've just looked it up on our app thing.
yeah,
And I'm a direct descendant of the two.
okay.
So it's 26, 27 generations down.
I didn't look that up, but I did look up Erik the Red. I'm not related to him, but I am related to his wife Þjóðhildur, and
Yeah,
hence I am a descendant of Leifur, I guess, or at least related to him.
Yeah, which is hard to come by, because at least that, at least these two moved back to Iceland, whereas Leifur and his clan seem to have stayed in place and then died out later on, or their descendants.
Yeah, which is what we're going to be talking about next. But there is one further part of the story as recounted in the Vinland Sagas.
Oh yeah, that's Freydis.
Which is Freydis.
Leif's sister. Leif's malicious little sister.
Yeah. She also shows up in Vikings. Valhalla, played by a Swedish model, obviously. But
Of course.
yeah, there are two accounts of her from two different sagas. One is that she actually goes with Thorfinnur to Greenland, and when they fight the natives and even
Vinland, to Vinland.
to Vinland,
Yeah.
and they when the natives are driving them away, the men all run away, but Freydis is not impressed, and she takes the sword from a dead warrior and she bares her breast and she slaps it on the sword,
Freaks.
which is
Freaks the natives out.
for so many reasons. They
Yes.
become absolutely terrified
Yes.
and run away. And this is sort of, I mean, in all stories she's a strong woman, but in this case she's a very brave, sort of heroic woman, you can say, or person in general, because she saves not just herself, but probably saves all the others. In the other story, she does not save anyone.
No, in the other story, she basically goes on a spree of killing.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the body count is exactly, but on their trip to Vinland, she ends up either being complicit to the murder of, or directly murdering,
Yeah.
half of the group or something.
Yeah, the female half. So
Yeah.
she goes with her husband. They go on two ships,
Yeah.
and then they come to Leif's Búðir, and then she says for some reason that the people on the other ship are not allowed to stay there, even though there's plenty of room, but they have to go stay somewhere else. So she takes up residence in Leif's Búðir, but then she goads her husband into going over and killing the neighbors, which I guess kind of runs in the family for her.
Yeah, true.
And then her husband and his men go in and kill the neighbors, but they don't want to kill the women there because they feel this is sort of morally
it's morally
wrong.
appalling to do.
And there are 5 women there, so she comes over, and the 5 women are still alive. So she goes and takes an axe herself and kills all 5 of them. Eventually they go back to Greenland, and she is not punished by Leifur, but her descendants are looked down upon, and were ever since.
All right. So we've more or less just recounted what we know from the Saga sources about travels to North America or Vinland. We, however, know that there must have been, we can assume that there was more travel and contact to that continent. We know that in, I think, 1347, the so-called Icelandic annals describe a ship getting wrecked up in the west part of Iceland in Snæfellsnes, and that ship was sailed by Greenlanders who had been bringing back wood from northern Canada,
Markland.
from northern Canada.
Yeah, and they just sort of offhandedly mention this, like the
Yeah, like
important
nothing
thing
is more normal.
Yeah, the important thing is that it blew ashore, not that they had been going to this new continent that they...
So I'm inclined to believe that the Greenlanders, at least, had kind of an ongoing relationship, if you can call that, with the continent of North America. They went there for wood. They may have actually gone there to hunt or to get various other supplies, trade with the locals. You never know, really, and it seems highly unlikely that they simply stopped going. And well, actually, the evidence is against that in terms of like this specific mention in the annals.
Yeah, and they certainly needed wood, which was certainly something that was sorely lacking in Greenland. But how far did they go, and where was the actual Vinland?
Yeah, that's on the other hand has been massively debated. There is very limited archaeological evidence for the presence of the Norse or Scandinavians in North America. There is, how do you even say this? Meadows, yeah. In
just call it Leifsbúðir.
Leifsbúðir, yeah. In Newfoundland, my French is horrible. Which is like that was excavated in the 60s, and that is a very clear example of a Norse sort of miniature settlement.
Yeah.
It's called Leifsbúðir. Doesn't really match the sort of written evidence.
No, it's the only archaeological evidence. Yeah, but if we go by the Sagas, it doesn't correspond. According to the Sagas, then there was a lot more vegetation.
Yes, flora and fauna, different flora and fauna.
Yeah, and there were grapevines, and biologically it seems that it couldn't have been any far norther than New England.
Well, there's like I think like one of the evidence they've used to kind of pinpoint this out, apart from what is in the Sagas, which is where they're talking about the winter solstice length of day.
Yeah.
Which when they talk about it, they use these really archaic terms for the time of day, which don't have a meaning to us anymore. In terms of like exact hours of the day. And so it's not a very good sort of it's not good evidence to figure out how far south they were. They claim that there was no winter.
Yeah.
But that would put you all the way south to, I don't know, the Carolinas or Georgia
or even northern Florida.
Which seems questionable.
Seems far, but it's not so rough waters. So they might have gone there. But then when it comes to like, I think it's called butternuts, which is something they excavated in Newfoundland. Yeah.
And if that is one of the things they were picking up on the continent proper and bringing back with them to Greenland, that means that Vinland was at least no further north than the estuary of the St. Lawrence River.
Yeah. They could also have gotten it. I mean, they moved around a lot, so they had a semi-permanent camp, but then they probably sailed all over, so they could have gotten it from somewhere.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
But the other archaeological thing, I mean, there are some archaeological things that have been found sort of up by Baffin Island and Labrador that indicates trading with the local Inuit.
Yeah.
But the only other thing found on sort of Canada or North America or the US part of the continent is a single coin from the late 11th century.
Yeah.
In I think a junk heap of some native, like on a Native American excavation pit or something.
Yeah, and the reason no one took it seriously to begin with was that there is a great tradition of finding Viking artifacts in North America, which often turned out to be from last week.
Yeah, people were planting those a lot. And
especially when our cousins from Norway, Sweden, Denmark, even Iceland started settling in the Midwest, particularly in Minnesota and the Dakotas, Wisconsin, they like to find evidence that the Vikings had been that far inland. One of the most famous is the Kensington stone found in 1898, which turned out to be sort of modern Swedish gibberish.
Yeah.
More or less. There are some bizarre ones like the Newport Tower in Rhode Island, which is from the 17th century probably.
Yeah, and somebody thought there was some claims that it was some sort of a Norse tower or something from the Knights Templar or whatever. Pick your pick your weirdest story.
Yeah.
But it's probably
Don't
just the
tell Dan Brown
foundation of a mill or something, most likely.
Yeah, nothing that the Vikings would even have built. Then there's the Vinland map, which was bought by Yale, which is surprisingly accurate.
Yeah, but
it does seem to show a new continent, but
that was a forgery supposed to have come out of was it the Venice or Constantinople or something? Like that was where it was supposed to have originated.
Yeah,
real.
But then it turned out that the ink was from the 20th century.
Yeah, so that was all fake. There was like a find of some Scandinavian or 11th century weapons somewhere in, I don't know, Toronto or somewhere, I can't remember, which everybody knew out there it was a plan.
Yeah.
So there's precious little evidence for those things.
Yeah.
But it kind of corresponds, like this love of manufacturing fake Norse stuff. It corresponds in time with the erection of these statues. This is happening in the late 1800s into the 20th century.
Yeah, and there are different motives. On one hand, the Scandinavians who moved to North America want to show that they were there before.
Yeah.
But there's also this sort of Anglo-Saxon snobbishness that, at that point, as you know, if you've seen The Godfather, the Italians are sort of the immigrant underclass, and the Anglo-Saxons don't want to have North America having discovered by an Italian in Spanish employ, so they play up this whole Viking saga. So I mean, it's always been politicized in some ways, still is today. But we do know for a fact that they did go there. We just don't know exactly where. But it has been established that they went to at least Newfoundland, and there is the main coin, which is very interesting because I think it was from the time of King Olaf. The Quiet.
Yeah.
And this puts it several decades after the, or maybe later.
This is going to be the 1080s, which is at least a half century after these recorded throws. Which makes perfect sense if they were still sort of going there from time to time, even though it's not recorded in the Sagas. It became a mundane thing they did.
Yeah.
So why not? Somebody lost his coin trading with some natives.
So we all know the famous quote attributed to Oscar Wilde is that Icelanders are the smartest people in the world. They found North America but had the good sense to lose it again. Well, found it and then we just mostly ignored it, which may have been the sensible thing to do.
But this is about it. Next time we'll be talking about, Valur,
what actually happened to the Vikings in Greenland, which is another mystery and an even bigger one. We know that they sort of left North America, but what happened to the Greenland Vikings themselves?
It's a very good question. We'll find out next time. Thank you for listening or watching. This podcast is produced by the Reykjavik Grapevine, a magazine published in Reykjavik, Iceland. For more information about the podcast and the magazine, go to www.grapevine.is. We also have a web shop where we sell all sorts of Icelandic things, amongst them Valur Gunnarsson's books, which you can buy there, and then we're all happy. So, see you next time. Bye bye. Kodi.